Alright guys, December is over, which means it's time to go through the 8 novels that I read this month. December was a meh month. There were some books that really stood out to me and some books that I completely forgot ever existed until I came back to make this video. But the way that we're going to go through these is just the order that I read them, except for the very last book, which is going to be my top read for the month of December. And then just like as a quick little disclaimer, there might be some spoilers as I start talking about the book. So if I come across a book and start talking about it and you haven't read it and you don't want to know anything about it, then just skip me talking about that particular novel. First up, we have Sorcery and Small Magics by Maiga Doocy. This is an adult fantasy that also is kind of cozy and it's also kind of romance. Our POV character here is Leovander Lovage, named shortened down to Leo, and he is attending a school where he is studying to be a scriber, although he's not very good at being a scriber because of a block on his magic that I'm not going to go into because that does contain kind of slight spoilers. But basically he gets paired with a caster, and the caster that he gets paired with is Grimm in one of his classes, and when they're working on a spell together, they accidentally cast a forbidden spell, which basically forces Leo to follow every command and demand that Grimm gives him. So it's essentially like an automatic compulsion spell. Well, it's forbidden, it could harm both of them. Leo for obvious reasons, Grimm because he could be put into essentially magical prison for casting such a spell. So they chase rumors of a very powerful sorceress that's out in the Wilder Woods, which is a forbidden wood with monsters, in order to get the spell off of Leo. This was a cute, fast read with a whimsical feel. The pacing is a little bit slower just because Leo is a very rambling protagonist, a meandering protagonist. I could see people getting irritated with the fact that his decision making can be questionable, even though the decision making fits with his character. He makes decisions sometimes and you're like, I understand why you made that decision, but it just feels really illogical. So kind of that conundrum of it is very character based, it is very fitting for Leo, but also why? Like why, honestly? So I could see some readers getting irritated with that. I thought that the characters were so cute and so lovable that I was willing to go with it because you also knew it was going to be a cozy fantasy, and despite the questionable decision making, things were going to be okay. There is a romance here. It's very slight romance. I do now know that this is going to be, I think, a trilogy. There's going to be more books, so I feel that we're going to get more of the romance later on, and I was okay with that because what interests me so much in this novel was the magic system. I thought it was so cool how you had the scribers who wrote spells and then you had the casters who actually cast them, and those two had to work together. And then there's also this implication that, magic works differently in different areas. So we're based where Leo and Grimm live, and this is how the magic works within this particular section of their world. But we know that if we were to travel someplace else, the magic would work slightly different. And I thought that was a really cool just like drop as well, because even after the trilogy finishes, if we don't travel very far, based solely on the way that the magic system works within this novel, I would be really interested in exploring the way that magic works in other areas of this world. I want to say one more thing about the romance, but I saved it till the end because it's kind of spoilery, so if you don't want any spoilers, then go ahead and skip to the next book. But I really appreciate that romance wasn't a huge part of this, mainly because Leo's under a love spell. And so any romantic interest that would have happened and kind of did happen, if it had escalated to a point of intimacy, it would have felt really non-con-ish. And so I'm happy that we're not going to get any more romance or any like true intimate romance until later novels, now that the curse has been broken. This was a pretty solid read. I did give it 3.75 stars, which is a pretty good rating for me. And I am excited to read the rest of the trilogy. I do plan on picking up book 2. Next up is Red, White, and Royal Blue by KT McQuiston. This is a contemporary romance. It is adult, and it is enemies to lovers, which is one of my favorite. Now, it's not like the stabby fantasy enemies to lovers that we get, because this romance happens between Alex Claremont Diaz, who is the president's son, and the Prince of Wales, Henry. Basically, these two do not like one another. Alex has to go across the pond for a wedding that Henry's at because it's Henry's brother's wedding. And while at the wedding, the two of them knock over the big, like, $75,000 cake. There are tabloids that immediately go out talking about tension between America and the UK and everything like that. And then they have to create this PR campaign essentially to prove that they are not enemies, but in fact like best friends. And of course, we know that the best friends thing turns into a lovers. I had already seen the movie of this, so it was kind of on my radar because I thought the movie was so unbelievably cute. When I got the opportunity to actually pick up the book, I did, not expecting to like it as much as I did. This is a classic situation of the book is so much better than the movie. There is a sister in the book, which I really appreciated. The main antagonist in the book is different from the movie. Like, there was so much about this book that I loved. Part of it's probably because I read it after the 2024 elections, and so it was like the hopeful utopia of what we didn't get. There are some very clear problems with this book. My biggest issue is the fact that real people are mentioned with fictional people propelling the plot forward. Like, I wish everything would have just been fictional aside from places. That would have made it a lot easier. But instead, real names of real politicians are combined with all of these fictional characters, and I just had to set things aside sometimes and be like, I'm just pretending that this is all fiction, and I'm not concerning myself with the way that politics have, done the roller coaster that they do since the book was published. So that was my big beef with the book. But when I set that aside, when I set some of my other nitpicky complaints aside, and I just focused on the cute little romance and kind of the idealism that the characters had for the kind of America and the kind of England that was desired, I found that really cute and hopeful and inspirational, and it was a book that I really needed at this point in time, and it is a book that I will be rereading. I did give this 4 stars, so it was a good read for me, and then I also have like spice levels that I rate my books with, and I gave this a spice level rating of 2. If you want to see what that means, then you can click the link in my bio that has the website, or my website attached, and go to ratings, and it'll show you kind of the breakdown of like closed door, open door, yada yada, for where my spice ratings align. Next up is Most Ardently by Gabe, Novoa. This is a queer retelling of Pride and Prejudice in which we follow the story of a trans man. There is a little bit of a content warning for this because our protagonist, Oliver, is trying to live his most authentic life, but in the society that he resides in, everybody knows him as Elizabeth. This is a quick and a heartwarming read about a trans man who is coming into his own and subverting the societal and patriarchal norms of the culture that he lives within. There is a dash of romance with this, with Darcy, and this is a young adult, so it really is like the dash with more emotional feelings than anything else. The writing was a little wobbly. It could have been more polished. And I think the main thing that frustrated me was that this society was very accepting, or the people in Oliver's life were very accepting of his transition, which is great and wonderful. And I love that. And I like that this was such a hopeful novel. What frustrated me is that, societally, it probably wouldn't have been that accepting. And if we're changing society to be accepting of Oliver's transition, I wish women would have been treated better within this novel. They were all like ditzy plot points used to like be sources of bonding between the men talking about how they were so ditzy. There were just some things that frustrated me, and I'm like, okay, if we're going to be progressive for one group of people, can we be progressive for all of them? It would have been such a quick change, and it would have made this feel more equal. I do think that it's a nice, hopeful story for trans rights. I just wish women would have been treated better. Next up is What the Woods Took by Courtney Gould, and this is a young adult paranormal horror. This novel follows 2 POVs. It follows Devin and it follows Ollie. Both of our POV characters are taken for an experimental group therapy, like excursion, that's a 50-day hike through the wilderness, in order to become better versions of themselves. And they are in this group of 5 or 6 people. Of course, there comes a point where they cross into a section of the woods where they are clearly not the only things there. In fact, there is a paranormal creature or creatures that are now hunting them. When the camp counselors disappear, it's up to the kids to find a way to not only get along with one another, but also help one another survive. So if it was not for the high star rating on Goodreads and Storygraph, I would have DNF'd this at 25%. The start of this story is so excruciatingly slow. It is all exposition and character buildup. And I'm glad I forced myself through because it ended up being a good story. But if you can't hang on for like 40% of the novel just getting character relationships, this is probably not going to be the book for you. I think partially because of the slow start and because I was getting frustrated with the novel, I never felt fully invested in the characters. I also feel like Gould had every opportunity to create a like visceral atmosphere with the creepiness and the horror, and it never felt like I never felt the suspense that I believe I should have, and I never felt like the encroaching closeness of the setting, not in the way that other books have done this, like The Dark We Know or Don't Let the Forest In. Those books, which kind of have this same premise of overcoming grief through paranormal intervention, they just do it better than this. So I guess if you want to pick this book up, you can. If you're interested in teens overcoming grief through paranormal intervention, tackling also concepts of shame, then those other two books that I mentioned are ones that I would recommend over this one. There were definitely some standout moments here, especially in the back half of the book, but like I said, by that point, I was already kind of irritated and frustrated, and then the back half of the book didn't quite make up for the first half. So with all that being said, I did end up giving this a lower star rating. This was 3.25 stars for me, which isn't bad by any means, but just thinking about some other books that I've read that have similar concepts, it didn't live up to them. Next up is We Solve Murders by Richard Osman. This is an adult mystery that has like a lot of humor. It's not necessarily mystery thriller, it's definitely murder mystery with humor. I don't even know how to like break down a quick synopsis of this because there's so much going on and there's so many different POVs, but essentially, okay. One of our characters, Amy, is framed for murders that she says that she doesn't commit, and through like the threads of the universe, all of these different POVs that we are introduced to within the novel, like an author, her stepfather, the hitman that's after her to kill her, all of these different people are tied into this main conspiracy, which is that influencers are being killed off. Amy is being framed for it. Everyone's either trying to kill Amy or to figure out what's going on. I hope that made some semblance of sense. I was really overwhelmed by this at the beginning because there's such a large cast, but once I started to figure everybody out and got their personalities down, I was locked in with this story. Osman has a really direct writing style that kind of doesn't focus on imagery or setting or anything like that at all, and really focuses on like dialogue and inner monologue. It's very different from what I normally read, so that also took me a second to get used to, but when I did, I think it's a brilliant way to write this story with such a large cast. It gives distinct personalities while also allowing like the punchlines of humor to come through. It was so brilliantly done. There were so many moments where I was just like outright cackling while I listened to this. Rosie, the author, is my favorite character. She was hilarious. There are a plethora of subplots that are happening beneath our main plot, but they all tie in together beautifully by the end. Like, I don't know, it was such a well done novel, and it was so different from things that I normally read that I finished it and just couldn't stop smiling and wanted the next installment immediately. So I will follow our two character crime fighting duos, which is Amy and her stepfather, through the rest of the books. I don't know how many there were going to be. I think it's going to be true detective style where like one book doesn't have to be read with the other. It's just these two solve crimes together. This was my first Osman, but after this, I put his Thursday Night Crime Club or whatever his other book is on hold, and I'm waiting for that to come in. This did get 4 stars from me. I really enjoyed it, and I highly recommend it. Next up is The Prospects by KT Hoffman. This is a contemporary adult romance, and it is sports focused. Both of our main characters play baseball. So this novel follows Gene, who is, I believe, the first recognized trans man in baseball. He plays for a minor league team, but he's always had dreams of making it to the majors. Dreams that are upset because Luis, who he knew from high school, gets traded to Gene's team and ends up taking his position. So Gene is a shortstop, Luis takes the shortstop position, and that boots Gene to second. And I do want to say really quick, if you know nothing about baseball, you can definitely read this book, because while baseball is a very important part of it, at no point is anything convoluted or complicated, and whatever you may need to know is explained in a really direct, concise way that doesn't detract from the story at all. So anyways, Jean and Louise have a little bit of beef going on. Louise is very quiet, doesn't interact with anybody all that much. Jean is very happy, so you don't get grumpy sunshine in this, but you get like isolated pariah sunshine. Anyways, long story short, they end up having to like reconcile with one another and actually work with one another if they're going to help the team win games. And as they're reconciling with one another, they start to have lovey-dovey feelings. There are a lot of really great things that happen in this novel. I do feel like we get a lot of representation. We get trans representation, queer representation. We get disability rep and a deaf character. We also get mental health rep with Louise's anxiety. So I think that there are some things that are really well-rounded, including Jean's professional, what's the word? Aspirations, that's the word I couldn't think of, mixed with his personal aspirations and his desire for love and acceptance. What fell through for me was that the relationship felt almost a little too convenient. And part of that is because we don't get a ton of Louise. Like, everything that we get about Louise doesn't feel organic to the novel. There's just something when I was reading it where I was like, okay, we're getting all this information about Louise. I know a lot of things about Louise, but it seems like we're only learning these things because it helps fuels Jean's plot. Like, Louise definitely felt like a plot device for Jean. So while Jean's character journey really felt well developed, the romance itself didn't. And this is a romance book, so that was a little disappointing. But that being said, overall, I did really enjoy this read. I ended up giving this 4 stars, and I gave it a spice rating of 3 chili peppers. So again, if you want to see what those ratings mean, just go click on my website, go to the ratings, and then look at my little infographic. Next up is A Marvellous Light by Freya Markse. This is book 1 in a trilogy that is completed. I read the other 2 books in January, so those 2 will be in my January wrap-up, but I will go ahead and tell you guys that I really enjoyed this trilogy. Like, this is a trilogy that overall I would recommend. But for this first book, we are looking at an adult fantasy romance. This story follows 2 protagonists, Robin and Edwin. We do get both of their POVs. Robin is a non-magical person who ends up in a position where he has to work directly with magical society, ensuring that the magic of that magical society does not then bleed into normal society to where normal people know that magic exists. Unbeknownst to Robin, his predecessor in this position was involved with this plot that will change all of magic in Britain, and the people who were involved in this think Robin knows something that he doesn't because he just found out magical society exists. In order to get him to talk, they curse him. Edwin is the person who unbushels or shows Robin magic because in his position he has to work with magical society, and because Edwin is the only person that Robin knows, he goes to him with the curse and says, help me. And so then they become entangled in this big ploy. I enjoyed this novel so much more than I thought I would. It's honestly something that just kept popping onto my radar through my socials, through Lumicrate, all the different things. And so finally I was like, let me put it on hold, and then when it comes through, you know, we'll see if I want to read it, and if not, then I'll release it back into the void of the library. And it came through, and I was like, you know what, I'm gonna go ahead and read it because it keeps popping up. Everything about this novel worked for me, from the romance to the magic system and the world builds to the mystery. Like, it all just fell in line so well, and I also really enjoyed the characters too. Like, I'm happy I didn't send this back into the void of Libby. Every part of this book held an important piece of information that either had something to do with the romance, had something to do with character development, or had something to do with the magic system and the world build. Like, I truly was entranced the entire time, and we have a multifaceted plot that comes together in a streamlined story. Like, Markse just did an excellent job with this, and the writing was, I don't want to say it's like good fan fiction. I feel like it's a step above good fan fiction. If you're somebody who reads fan fiction, you know the good fan fiction where it's like just you can inhale the story. I finished this in a day. The cast is really distinct, and our 2 protagonists, Edwin and Robin, they just slot together really well. Like, Robin is this optimistic idealist who just believes that through sheer willpower things will work out. And then Edwin is this little ball of anxiety who's a pessimist and is like, well, maybe it'll work out. Maybe we can make it happen. But also, we're probably going to die. The two of them together just worked so well, and they were so sweet and cute. And so you get this nice romance, but you also see how the two of them fit together to like create character journeys, and then also how they learn more about the world and the magic system through one another. I don't know, like I said, it just worked so well, and I loved this first book. And I'll talk about the other two whenever I do my January wrap up, but I will say, highly recommend the trilogy. Second book was not my favorite. Third book was. This installment got a 4.5 stars from me, and then on the spice rating, it got 3 chili peppers. And my top read of the month was Don't Let the Forest In by C.G. Drews. This is a young adult gothic horror. We follow high school senior Andrew, who is an aspiring writer and basically escapes the pressure of societal norms through creating his own fairy tales. His best friend, Thomas, uses his art style in order to make these fairy tales come to life. Whenever we pick up our story, they have just returned back to school from summer break, and something's going on with Thomas. Andrew can't figure out what it is, until he follows Thomas out into the woods, where he realizes that his best friend is killing the monsters from Andrew's stories, which somehow are coming to life. From there, the rest of our story is the two of them trying to navigate school, trying to navigate their conflicting feelings for one another, and then also fighting these monsters in the wood and trying to figure out why are they here and how do they stop them permanently. This novel was just masterful. I mean, the writing that C.G. Drews uses is so stunning and so beautiful. I know that there are people who don't like flowery prose, and I get why you don't like flowery prose, but I feel like because of the way that fairy tales and folklore is used in this, and the fact that Andrew is a writer, the way that he tells this story and narrates this story is so indicative of the way that his mind works. It is stunning. This book really follows the insanity of storytelling. It centers itself on kind of deep diving through grief, through identity, through mental illness, through the ways that we embrace darkness within ourselves, and then within, what we can't control around us. Not only was this storyline immersive, but the characters truly captured my heart right from the beginning. I was invested from the very first page. Really difficult topics were tackled in an eloquent manner that didn't shy away from the gritty, messy side that is indicative of dealing with things like grief, loss, shame, mental illness. And I think the use of art and stories within the book itself really created depth within the novel. They allowed for even more separation between the fantastical and the logical. And that in turn drove the atmosphere of this into true surrealism, gothic, just you don't know what's real and what's not. I will say the ending is extremely ambiguous. So if you don't like open-ended endings or ambiguous endings, you would absolutely hate this novel, because like I said, throughout the story, it's kind of hard to tell what is real and what isn't real, but that ties in so directly with the mental illness that's happening. The framework of this is so well done. This is a novel that weeks after I finished it, I couldn't stop thinking about, and sitting here giving this review to you guys, I want to pick it up again and reread it again, because I feel like it would be even more brilliant on a reread. So for that reason, this was a 4.75 stars. I think that this is so phenomenally executed. All right, so those are my 8 books in December. If you've read any of these, let me know what your thoughts were on them, or if you're interested enough to pick one of these up now, let me know. I don't have a TBR for January because I'm putting myself on a book buying ban. I'm only allowed to buy 1 book a month, but I'm definitely not going to only read 1 book a month. So from here on out in 2025, it's really just going to depend on what's actually coming through on my Libby. Like I said, we're already partially into January by the time I'm recording this, and definitely by the time I post it. So you know that I've already read the rest of Markse's trilogy. I've read a couple of other books beyond that, but January is looking to be a pretty good reading month. And I hope it ends up being a really good reading month for you guys as well.